Is the US global role over? Exactly a month after President Donald Trump said that the coronavirus was pretty much under control in the United States, the World Health Organization issued a stern warning. America is on course to become the new epicenter of the COVID-19. For weeks, Trump downplayed the severity of the virus and avoided taking action to stop its spread in the United States. He even wrote off media coverage of the outbreak as a political hoax designed to hurt his brand. America lost crucial time. The sheer magnitude of the outbreak is now like a giant wave that's about to overtake the entire US healthcare system. Trump has finally begun to change his tone.
I didn't feel different. I've always known this is a pandemic.
But the damage has already been done. The virus has spread to all 50 states, infecting tens of thousands of Americans and killing more and more each day. Even now, rather than take responsibility, Trump and his advisors are blaming China for mishandling the outbreak and allegedly suppressing information about the virus.
People would have known about it. It could have been stopped in place. It could have been stopped right where it came from, China. If we would have known about it, if they would have known about it. It could have been stopped in its tracks. Unfortunately, they didn't decide to make it public. But the whole world is suffering because of it.
The Trump administration's response has been characterized by misinformation, missteps, and bureaucratic infighting. Refusing to tell people the truth will cost lives because it undercuts containment practices like social distancing. It also erodes the public's trust in government. If anything, the coronavirus outbreak has once again laid bare the division in America.
With the outbreak of the coronavirus in the United States, we've seen just how deeply polarized this country is. Many in the Trump camp initially alleged that this was a hoax. This was not a real public health concern. They said that this was all a ploy to make President Trump look bad because the economy was quote-unquote thriving. The truth, of course, is that the economy is thriving for the Jeff Bezoses and the CEOs of Goldman Sachs and the Trumps and the Rupert Murdochs, but it's not thriving for the everyday people, where unemployment and the opioid crisis and police brutality and all of these social indicators are at high numbers.
Since taking office, Trump has taken steps that experts had warned would prove disastrous during a public health crisis. He has shut down the White House's entire global health unit, ignored warnings that the US is unprepared to deal with the pandemic, and proposed budget cuts for Centers for Disease Control and Prevention and the Department of Health and Human Services. The most recent mistakes include manufacturing failures in diagnostic testing and the decision to test very few people for the coronavirus.
We don't know how long this crisis will last. You don't even know if you've contracted the virus right away, or maybe your spouse, maybe your child, maybe your parent. The administration didn't pay attention to tests, and now we're paying the price, even though many of us were hollering for weeks about the emerging issues with testing.
Following days of partisan bickering, the Senate finally passed a $2 trillion stimulus package in an effort to reverse the destruction the pandemic has brought to American lives and wallets. The Trump administration also eliminated a key American public health position in Beijing that could have helped the US get an earlier jump on a response to the coronavirus. Dr. Linda Quick, a medical epidemiologist embedded in China's disease control agency, left her post last July. As an American employee, Dr. Quick was in an ideal position to inform US officials of the coronavirus outbreak.
But the truth of the matter is you got a president who is arrogant, who is ignorant, who is literally, as I said, undermining the good work of scientists, who keeps making these absurd remarks. And in fact, he underestimated, diminished the initial threat facing this country. A president who had a brain in his head would have brought the scientists together and say, look, how serious is this threat? What do we do? What do we do now?
Has President Trump made the U.S. health system less effective in dealing with a pandemic like the coronavirus?
The U.S. healthcare system has been in shambles for decades, and Trump has definitely made it worse with his typical Republican budget cuts, deregulation, allowing corporations to merge, for example, hospital chains, insurance companies. Trump's just sort of the crescendo on a really broken system where corporations and billionaires run the system, and they're really the democracy.
For weeks, state and local health officials had warned that a surge in cases could overwhelm the U.S. healthcare system, begging the federal government for assistance. Now, the surge has come. In states like New York and California, a deluge of cases has already hit hospitals. A shortage of protective equipment such as masks, respirators, and gowns is crippling health workers' ability to respond. In some hospitals, doctors are reusing gear, putting themselves and patients at risk of infection.
The president is absent. We don't have masks. We don't have ventilators. I was very blunt with the people of my city yesterday that at the beginning of April, we will run out of basic medical supplies because of the intense strain that's being put already on our hospitals by this crisis. We literally will not have the things we need to save people's lives. And I'm telling you, in 2 weeks' time or 3 weeks' time, we will have nothing left, and I've not gotten a hint of an answer from the federal government about when resupply is coming.
In a joint letter to President Trump, the American Medical Association, the American Hospital Association, and the American Nurses Association called on the administration to immediately use the Defense Production Act to increase the domestic production of medical supplies and equipment. Although Trump has signed the DPA, he has declared he would only be using it in a worst-case scenario in the future.
I would like to begin by announcing some important developments in our war against the Chinese virus. We'll be invoking the Defense Production Act just in case we need it.
Doctors and nurses on the front lines say there is no time for confusion and inaction. Thousands of lives are at risk as hospitals and medical centers are fast running out of supplies. While President Trump has suggested that the coronavirus outbreak was inconceivable, public health experts and intelligence agencies had frequently warned that the U.S. would sooner or later face a widespread infectious outbreak and was totally unprepared.
We've lived through SARS and H1N1 and swine flu, and each time we were warned that the next one could be this one. We weren't ready. We're not prepared.
How not ready?
How does the rest of the world have all this testing, and it seems like we're struggling to get our own versions of testing out? The experience of every other country says the way you get through this is extreme testing.
The crisis has been foretold. Why is the U.S. so woefully unprepared despite the warnings?
The U.S. is woefully unprepared because it refused to heed the lessons from Wuhan, from China, and from other countries with their experiences with pandemics. As we heard in Trump's racist speech this week, he wants to characterize this as a Chinese virus. And if we were to use that formulation, then surely smallpox and all of the colonizers' diseases that they brought to the indigenous would be white man's diseases or colonizers' diseases.
The crisis has sent the economy into a tailspin in the U.S. and around the world. Millions are facing unemployment and businesses are in a steep decline. The tourism industry has ground to a halt. So have restaurants, airlines, hotels, gyms, and cruise lines. Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin has warned that the pandemic could drive the unemployment rate to 20%. The stock market has posted enormous losses and trading has come to a standstill. In a nutshell, Americans are producing less, spending less, and consuming less.
Even as the market shifts from day to day, the coronavirus is slowing our economy to a near standstill, and we're almost certainly anticipating a recession. I have never sensed a greater sense of uncertainty, a greater fear of the future, of the unknown.
Is America headed into a recession?
Okay, I think not only is the U.S. heading for a recession, but I would argue that there's a real possibility that we're entering a deflationary depression.
The stock market plummeted again this morning, and the number of coronavirus cases across the world has now surpassed 300,000, with about 40,000 here in the U.S., or as the president assured us at the start of this crisis.
When you have 15 people, and the 15 within a couple of days is going to be down to close to zero.
Ah, so close. Trump's like the dumbest Price is Right contestant in history. Donald, how much for this brand new Porsche dining set and 10-day luxury stay at the Ritz-Carlton in Hawaii?
Close to zero.
Does the horn sound mean I won? Was that the winner's horn?
COVID-19. Just a few weeks ago, President Trump seemed pretty sure of victory in the November election. Democratic efforts to impeach the president had failed and backfired. Support from his Republican base remained steady. The economy was doing well. Stock markets were at an all-time high, and unemployment hovered at all-time lows. Trump could boast of his stewardship of a strong economy, which is usually a recipe for re-election. But the coronavirus hit and everything changed. Trump is no longer running against the Democrats. He's running against a virus he has so miserably mishandled.
Presidents are defined by crises. The first re-election for Barack Obama was largely a referendum on how he did with the Great Recession. For George W. Bush, it was clearly a referendum on 9/11.
Right.
Increasingly, it feels like the 2020 election will be a referendum on how the administration handles this crisis.
Yeah.
This is exactly the time when it's what government exists for.
The November election could become a referendum on President Trump's handling of the coronavirus, especially if it leads to a full-blown health and economic crisis. To win re-election, Trump must give the American voters confidence that he's mobilizing the full force of the federal government. If that doesn't happen, he will lose. Is the coronavirus an existential threat to Trump's re-election?
In terms of what will happen in November with the elections, certainly it seems that this coronavirus could be the undoing of the Trump administration. It seems like we're gearing up for a showdown between the right wing, the conservatives, who want to get the quote-unquote economy back up running, which is, of course, their bottom lines and their profits up running, and the everyday people who want to take care of their families.
Trump and his Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, have taken to using the phrase the China virus to describe the COVID-19.
It comes from China. That's why. It comes from China.
This information is coming from random actors around the world, but often, too, coming from places like the Chinese Communist Party, from Russia, from Iran. Those are nations that want to undermine what we're doing here, our democracy, our freedom, the way that we're responding to this risk to the Wuhan virus.
As U.S. officials continue to condemn China, experts warn that the two world powers are heading into a new Cold War that could seriously impede efforts to fight the virus and save the global economy. Chinese hawks see the pandemic as a chance to pile up pressure on a fast-growing China, which in their eyes seeks military, economic, and technological domination over the United States.
We need to move essential manufacturing back to the United States. It's crazy not to. More broadly, we'll need to start treating China like the dangerous Cold War-level adversary it has clearly become. Don't let them lie to you. This crisis began in China, and that's significant. Whether the coronavirus escaped from a bioresearch lab, as independent Chinese scientists have claimed, or arose in a filthy street market selling wild animals for food. Either way, China's third-world health practices played a central role.
The latest meeting of the group of 7 countries ended in disarray on Wednesday because of Washington's call to include language in a draft final statement that linked the coronavirus to China. The 6 other members of the G7, namely the UK, France, Germany, Italy, Japan and Canada, rejected the US characterization, and no joint statement was produced. How will this global pandemic affect US-China relations?
Definitely, again, I think the hawks in this country, they're always looking for a war. I think part of the reason this occurred, in fact, was that they weren't able to get a war with Russia through all these lies about, how Russia was interfering in our campaign and, Russia was behind Trump and all this stuff, which unfortunately the Democrats sort of took it and ran with it and became the new war party in this country. So there's definitely a segment of the population in Washington that wants a war with China, that wants a war with Russia or anybody else, because it's just contracts for big corporations, defense contractors, oil companies. So they didn't get that. So I think it's part of the reason this virus kind of occurred. There'll be money in this for the big tech companies. Amazon's hired 100,000 workers.
Regardless of the blame game, the coronavirus is testing the status of the US as a global power. As Washington falters, China is maneuvering to position itself as the global leader in pandemic response.
After weeks of fighting the disease with tough measures, China is now sharing its experience with the rest of the world and providing much-needed supplies.
From being at the receiving end of coronavirus aid from other nations to helping the rest of the world battle the disease, China has its domestic outbreak largely under control and is now supplying millions of masks and other badly needed items to struggling governments around the globe. Beijing hopes the aid will help build political ties and diffuse criticism that it was too slow in tackling the outbreak.
Experts say the global pandemic could fundamentally change Washington's position in global politics. Can the coronavirus reshape the world order?
And we see the Chinese sending aid and support to Spain, to Italy, and beyond. And all the United States knows how to do is send more weapons, more soldiers of occupation and invasion, more threats, more sanctions, and more war. So perhaps in this unprecedented type of way, the coronavirus could help to reshape the global order as the vast majority of the people's over 7 billion population come to see the empire and just how vulnerable and greedy the empire is.
One of the countries hardest hit by the coronavirus is Iran. The spread of the virus in the country has been accelerated by shortages of medicine and equipment caused by US sanctions.
My country is among the hardest hit by the coronavirus, even as, like other nations, we are now learning how to better confront it. Sadly, a huge part of the danger Iranians face is due to restrictions unjustly imposed on them by the United States government. Iran today is the most intensely sanctioned country in history, not in line with United Nations decisions, but contrary to them.
Iran has urged the United Nations to press the US to lift sanctions, which are hampering efforts to bring the outbreak under control. China, Russia, and Pakistan, along with a number of international organizations and rights groups, have also called on the Trump administration to ease sanctions on Iran, Meanwhile, the US government has said it will not suspend the sanctions and even imposed more restrictions against the country. However, Washington has claimed it is ready to help Tehran combat the pandemic.
We have made offers to the Islamic Republic of Iran to help, and we've made clear to others around the world in the region that humanitarian assistance to push back against the coronavirus in Iran is something that the United States of America fully supports. We will continue to support. That's true for every nation. We will bring to bear our diplomatic power and our capacity to deliver technical and medical assistance wherever we can.
Iranian leaders have dismissed the offer as strange and a lie.
Even amid this pandemic, the U.S. government has vengefully refused to lift its unlawful and collective punishment, making it virtually impossible for us to even buy medicine and medical equipment.
UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres said the sanctions are heightening the health risks for millions of people and weakening the global effort to contain the spread of the new coronavirus. In a letter to the G20 powers, Guterres called for lifting of sanctions on Iran and others to ensure access to food, essential health supplies, and COVID-19 medical support.
The U.S. has never been known for its international solidarity. The diametrical opposite with cruel sanctions on Zimbabwe, Iran, North Korea, Venezuela, Cuba, Syria, any country that the U.S. cannot fully control. So this time more than ever is a time to call for an end to all sanctions.
Trump administration officials, however, insist that U.S. sanctions are not preventing medical supplies from getting to Iran. That's not true, as banks and companies have refrained from taking part in any such ventures out of fear of being subject to secondary U.S. sanctions. Iranian officials say the Trump administration is taking advantage of the health crisis and capitalizing on its maximum pressure campaign against Tehran.
You have these hawks in Washington trying to take advantage of it, trying to blame China, trying to put these additional sanctions on Iran where your people can't even get the right medicine, the right equipment. It's not so different in this country. We have many states that can't get equipment, that can't get the things that they need. So it's really, again, you have to take it to an international level, and you have to see this, I think, as a war by the 1%, the international oligarchy, the Bill Gates of the world. I see this as a war on the people of the world. It's a depopulation program. They don't want to get medicine to people. They want to let people die. This is the reality of it. And this is what we all have to face. And what we should be doing is coming together as a global community.
And the White House, ignoring these warnings, isn't the only reason to be pissed off at politicians today. Because last night, and this is one of the craziest stories, last night we learned that at least 4 senators may have gotten advanced information about the coronavirus and then sold their stocks before the market crashed. Yeah. Now, these senators say that them making money off of this coronavirus information is all a coincidence, but come on, people, really? Yeah, you got top secret corona information, and then you just happen to dump your stocks that get affected by coronavirus? Get the f*** out of here, man. This would be like if the captain of the Titanic was just walking around in a life vest before hitting the iceberg, like, don't worry, everyone, I'm just wearing this as a fashion accessory. Now please enjoy the buffet. Everything is normal.